Thank you, Prime Minister Holness, for your kind words of introduction. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference.
In 2022, the world held its breath as Queen Elizabeth II's health took a sudden and final decline, leaving her 70-year reign hanging in the balance. Amidst the uncertainty, it was Princess Anne who found herself at the center of a heartbreaking moment in history. As her mother's condition worsened, Princess Anne made an incredibly difficult decision. She would remain by Queen Elizabeth's side, refusing to leave her, even as family members raced to be with the monarch. Her commitment to her mother, a woman who had been both a queen and a mother, was unwavering. This was a story of quiet strength, profound love, and royal duty. Join us as we dive into the final days of Queen Elizabeth, exploring the deeply personal journey of Princess Anne, the unshakable pillar in her mother's last moments. The weight of legacy, a mother's final days. Queen Elizabeth II's reign wasn't just historic. It defined the role of the British monarchy in modern society. For 7 decades, she remained a steadfast and unchanging figure, weathering wars, political upheavals, family scandals, and immense public scrutiny with remarkable poise and grace. Throughout the period, Elizabeth became synonymous with the monarchy itself, an embodiment of tradition and stability for both the British people and the royal family. Yet beneath the polished, impeccable exterior that the world saw, Queen Elizabeth was also a mother who instilled in her children the same unwavering sense of duty and resilience that defined her reign. However, when her health began to decline, it was Princess Anne, her only daughter, who would become the most constant and supportive presence by her side. Anne's devotion to her mother was not just a product of her royal duties, but also a deep, personal bond. Unlike her brothers, who held varying degrees of responsibility and prominence within the royal family, Princess Anne had always embraced a more hands-on approach. She was rarely seen in the spotlight, but was known for her dedication to charitable causes and her work, both of which she performed quietly and without fanfare. As her mother's health began to decline, Anne knew that this would be a momentous time in both the history of the monarchy and the history of their personal relationship. She understood the profound nature of the changes that were to come, not only for the British people, but for her family as well. But the impending loss of her mother was not just a public matter. It was intensely personal for Anne. It was a loss she knew she would have to bear in the most intimate, heartbreaking way. A unique bond, the Queen and her daughter. Throughout Elizabeth's reign, Princess Anne's role within the royal family had been unique. She was often regarded as her mother's mirror, sharing many of the same qualities of duty, resilience, and a sense of responsibility. However, their relationship was distinct in one key way. Anne was the more hands-on and practical royal. Her devotion was quiet, never seeking public approval or adulation, but rather living out the royal duties she had inherited. Anne's approach to her responsibilities reflected a no-nonsense attitude, one that was often praised by those closest to the family, but also kept her firmly grounded outside the flashy limelight. Unlike her brothers, who had more high-profile roles within the monarchy, Anne was content to work behind the scenes, embodying a spirit of service over spectacle. This attitude had grown even more pronounced as Elizabeth aged. The Queen had always been known for her stoicism and ability to carry on despite personal challenges. But as she became older, Anne's sense of responsibility to her mother's legacy deepened. Where once her public appearances were dictated by royal duty, Anne now took a much more active role in ensuring her mother's health and well-being. This wasn't the product of being assigned a role or a responsibility. It was born from a deep sense of love and respect, and a quiet promise to always be there for her mother, no matter the cost. Over the years, Anne had developed a particularly close relationship with her mother. While the public was largely unaware of their private moments together, It was known that the Queen and Princess Anne shared a mutual love of horses, which served as an escape from the pressures of their royal duties. This shared interest provided them with rare moments of joy and solace in a world that often demanded everything from them. When Queen Elizabeth's health began to show signs of decline, it was Anne who noticed the changes first. The Queen had always been remarkably reserved about her health, but Anne, ever observant, could tell that the end was nearing. The Queen's energy, once a hallmark of her public persona, began to dwindle, and the vibrant monarch who had ruled for so many decades was becoming more subdued. The decline, Anne's growing realization. As the months passed in 2022, signs of Queen Elizabeth's failing health became more and more apparent. Once renowned for her sharpness, her resilience, and her vigor, the Queen began to withdraw from public life. Her famous stamina, which had been evident even well into her 90s, began to falter. The physical toll of her advanced age, combined with the demands of her reign, left her increasingly frail. Anne, always perceptive of her mother's state, recognized the changes more clearly than anyone. She had spent years observing her mother's behavior and health, often being the one to provide her with comfort during times of personal strain. Now, as the Queen grew weaker, Anne became the pillar upon which her mother could lean. She was not just a dutiful daughter. She was the steadfast presence that her mother needed, the quiet strength in the midst of an inevitable farewell. Anne's growing awareness of her mother's mortality was not accompanied by dramatic gestures or public proclamations. Instead, it was marked by a quiet, almost stoic acceptance. Queen Elizabeth had lived a long life, one marked by historical milestones and profound moments, and she knew that the end was near. In private conversations, the Queen began to speak more openly about the prospect of her own death. At one point, she even mentioned her concerns about passing away at Balmoral Castle, worrying about the logistical challenges it would present to her family. Yet Anne, who had always understood her mother's wishes, encouraged her to remain at Balmoral, recognizing that the Queen felt most at peace in the Scottish Highlands. Balmoral had been her sanctuary, a place where she could retreat from the eyes of the world, and it was there that her final moments would be spent. For Anne, these private moments with her mother were both a gift and a heavy burden. They were opportunities to connect with her mother in a way that few others could, but they also served as a reminder that time was quickly running out. As the Queen's health worsened, Anne made the conscious decision to remain by her mother's side, providing both comfort and stability during the difficult days leading up to her passing. The heartbreaking call. Anne's responsibility. On the evening of September 7th, 2022, Princess Anne was at Balmoral Castle in Scotland when she received a call that would change the course of history. The message was clear and urgent. Her mother's health had taken a sudden and dramatic turn for the worse. Anne, who had been by her mother's side throughout the day, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The Queen's time was running out, and Anne knew that she had to act swiftly. Without hesitation, she contacted her brothers, most notably Prince Charles, who was expected to take the throne upon his mother's passing. The call between Anne and Charles was nothing short of heartbreaking. In this private moment, Anne informed her brother of the Queen's rapidly declining health and urged him to come to Balmoral as soon as possible. She made it clear that there was no time to waste. Anne, ever the dutiful daughter, made the decision to ensure that her mother's final moments were spent surrounded by family, even as the world held its breath. In this moment, Anne's role as both a daughter and a royal was more apparent than ever before. As she spoke to Charles, the emotional weight of the conversation was clear. Anne, who had spent her life serving her family and her country, now had to navigate the delicate balance between personal grief and royal duty. Her voice remained steady, calm, and resolute as she emphasized the urgency of the situation. This was not just the end of her mother's reign. It was the end of an era, and Anne was determined to ensure that the transition was as dignified and respectful as possible. The race to Balmoral, family's final gathering. The news that the Queen's health had taken a turn for the worse quickly spread through the royal family, sending them into a flurry of activity. Family members, who had been scattered across the country, rushed to Balmoral, knowing that time was running out. For Charles and Camilla, who were already on their way, the journey was bittersweet. It was a journey marked by the solemn knowledge that the Queen, their matriarch, was slipping away, and that their lives and the monarchy would soon be forever changed. As Anne had already arrived, she was prepared to fulfill her role as her mother's constant companion during these final hours. Anne's calm presence and steady support were crucial as the family gathered at Balmoral to say their goodbyes. Each family member, in their own way, faced the reality of the Queen's passing, and Anne, as the most steadfast of her children, stood as the foundation for them all. The events of September 2022 marked a profound and historic moment, not just for the British monarchy, but for the royal family. Princess Anne's role in these final moments was a testament to her unwavering love and commitment to her mother. It was a heart-wrenching chapter in their relationship, one that would be forever etched in history as a time when family bonds were tested by the inescapable reality of loss. And through it all, Anne remained a pillar of strength, proving that, no matter the cost, she would be there for her mother until the very end. The weight of personal loss and public duty. Princess Anne, known for her calm and steady presence, felt the immense weight of both personal loss and public responsibility during the final hours of her mother, Queen Elizabeth II's, life. The moment was not only a turning point for the royal family, but also for Anne personally, as she was called to balance the deep sorrow of losing her mother with the incredible duty of being the first to lead her family through the transition. As Anne stood vigil beside her mother's bed, she felt the gravity of the situation more than anyone could imagine. Unlike her brothers, who had their own responsibilities within the royal family, Anne's role was different. She was not simply there to witness her mother's death. She was there to provide her family with strength, to be the pillar that her siblings and the nation needed in this painful moment of loss. Anne's commitment to duty, which had been evident throughout her life, had never been more crucial. She was not just a daughter saying goodbye to her mother. She was a daughter carrying the monarchy's legacy into a new era. In this private, intimate moment, Anne embodied the poise and grace that her mother had exemplified throughout her reign, offering both her family and the monarchy a sense of continuity amidst the sorrow. As the hours passed, Anne knew that her mother's death was imminent. The Queen, who had remained so steadfast and resilient throughout her long reign, was now nearing the end of her journey. Anne, having witnessed the gradual decline in her mother's health, was already mentally preparing herself for this moment, though it was an inevitability she still dreaded. She had quietly stepped into her role as her mother's primary support, as her constant companion, and now, as her mother's life drew to a close, Anne would be the one to guide her family through the tragedy, leading them into the unknown with strength and grace. Charles's reflection, the burden of legacy. Meanwhile, in the midst of this somber occasion, Anne's brother, Prince Charles, was absorbed in deep reflection. As the heir to the throne, the imminent death of his mother forced him to confront the reality of the new responsibilities that awaited him. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, yet nothing could prepare him for the weight of losing the woman who had been his constant companion and guide for 70 years. As he hurried to Balmoral, Charles took some time to speak with his private secretary, processing the magnitude of the moment. His reflection wasn't just about his personal grief. It was also about the monumental role he would now play in both the monarchy and the world. In those moments, Charles acknowledged the profound significance of what lay ahead, the immense weight of his new title, and the legacy of his mother that he would need to uphold. However, as he raced toward Balmoral, neither he nor Anne could have foreseen the painful surprise that fate had in store. The tragic irony was that Charles would not be able to say his final goodbye to his mother, despite his best efforts to reach her. The final hours of Queen Elizabeth II were marked by quiet sadness, an atmosphere of solemn reverence as Anne remained by her mother's side. Only the closest family members and a few trusted confidants were permitted to share in the Queen's last moments. It was a peaceful, almost sacred atmosphere in the dimly lit room, a sharp contrast to the public persona of the monarch who had led the country with strength and dignity for decades. The Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie, the Queen's minister from Craykerk, provided spiritual comfort, reading passages from the Bible to the monarch as she lay in her final moments. His voice, low and steady, reverberated through the room as Anne stood close by, offering her quiet support. Anne's hand rested gently on her mother's, offering a final gesture of love and care. The simple act of holding her hand seemed to convey everything Anne felt. The promise that she would remain by her mother's side until the very end. A promise of unwavering love and devotion that Anne had kept throughout her life. A heartbreaking reality. The Queen's passing. Before Charles arrives. As the hours passed, the weight of Anne's vigil grew ever heavier. She could feel the finality of the moment approaching with each passing second. And yet, just as Anne's resolve strengthened, fate dealt a cruel blow. Despite all the preparations, all of Anne's efforts to ensure Charles would have time to say goodbye, the Queen's death came before Charles could arrive. Anne had hoped that her brother, now King Charles III, would be able to say his farewells to their mother, but the Queen slipped away in the moments before he could reach her. It was a tragic turn of events that added another layer of sorrow to an already painful time. Anne, who had been the one to alert Charles about his mother's failing health, was now faced with the realization that he would not be able to witness his mother's death firsthand. For Anne, the grief was deep. She had lost not just her mother, but a part of her own identity as well. She had spent so many years devoted to her mother, and now that bond had been severed. Still, amidst the heartbreak, Anne took a deep sense of pride in having been there for her mother in her final moments. It was a bittersweet comfort, knowing that she'd been by her mother's side when it mattered most. As the Queen's death was met with a profound silence in the room, the atmosphere shifted from grief to a quiet reverence. For Anne, there was a moment of relief mixed with sorrow. Her mother's suffering had ended, and the Queen's legacy was secure. She had fulfilled her duty, just as she had promised, and now it was time to help her family navigate the transition that was already unfolding. The family gathers, the silent passing of an era. As news of Queen Elizabeth's death spread among the family, Balmoral Castle became a place of mourning, a sanctuary where family members came to gather and reflect. Charles, who had just become king, now stood at the center of this historical moment. His new title and responsibility weighed heavily on him as he prepared to face a new chapter in his life, one that had come with the heavy price of losing his mother. Anne, ever the stabilizing force, moved quietly through the halls of Balmoral, offering her support to her siblings and helping with the immediate arrangements for her mother's passing. In those moments, Anne was not just a sister. She was the embodiment of calm strength for the entire royal family. Her presence provided a sense of continuity, a link between the monarchy's past and its future. Each family member mourned in their own way, but Anne's stoic composure helped them process the loss with dignity, providing an atmosphere of solemn unity despite the personal grief each member felt. But Anne's role didn't end with her immediate family. She also supported the household staff, those who had served the Queen for decades. Many of them, like Anne, had known the Queen not just as a monarch but as a person, and their grief was just as deep. In hushed conversations, Anne helped honor her mother's memory by providing comfort and a listening ear. The staff, who had been with the royal family through thick and thin, were now in mourning, and Anne's role as a leader within the family extended beyond her siblings to everyone who had worked so closely with the Queen. As the royal family navigated this intimate mourning period, Anne knew that the next phase would require all of her composure and resilience. The world would soon know of the Queen's passing, and the public farewell would demand an entirely different set of emotional skills. Anne, always the dutiful daughter, knew that the moment to announce her mother's death to the world had arrived. A leader's duty. The public announcement. The responsibility of making the announcement fell to Anne. Although the royal family had known this moment would eventually come, the weight of delivering such a historic message was still overwhelming. For Anne, the task was not just about delivering the news. It was about honoring her mother's legacy and ensuring the transition of power was seamless. The world was about to experience a seismic shift, and Anne felt the full force of her role in bridging her mother's final act of duty with the public mourning that would follow. The announcement came with the profound realization that, for the first time in history, the British monarchy would experience a significant change in leadership. As Anne prepared to deliver the news, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. This moment would be a final public farewell to her mother, and she knew it would be one that the world would remember forever. She had made the decision to honor her mother through strength and dignity, and as she stepped into the public eye to make the announcement, she repeated to herself, "I made my decision." It was a silent affirmation of her commitment to upholding the values her mother had so steadfastly embodied. The public response to the announcement was immediate, with an outpouring of love and condolences from the royal family and from the citizens of the United Kingdom. The Queen had been a beloved figurehead for decades, and her passing marked the end of an era. Yet, in this moment, Anne's strength and composure helped guide both her family and the nation through the mourning process. This announcement would be the beginning of the grieving period, a time when the world would reflect on the Queen's remarkable life and reign. But for Anne, it was also a moment of profound personal loss, a final public farewell to her mother, one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life.